Hello, friends, and welcome to Tim Kirby Russia, where I, radio talk show host, award-winning radio talk show host, and political analyst Tim Kirby, break down the inner workings of Russia for you, because there's a lot of potential in Russia to find new ideas and new ways of doing things that just get completely ignored. They always stay trapped inside of Russia, and I feel it's my duty to help them escape out there into the ether. And one of those issues is actually taxation, believe it or not. And we have a big guest today, possibly the biggest, most famous guest of this program so far. Stefan Molyneux is here with us to talk about taxation. Yeah, the Stefan Molyneux. That's pretty sweet. So anyways, he'll be coming up very soon, so stay tight. You'll listen to me babble on about taxation in Russia for a little bit, but then we'll get to the piece de resistance very soon. So anyways, guys, let's break down taxation from a Russian perspective. Okay, guys, imagine this. You're in America, maybe England, somewhere in Europe. Taxes tend to be high. And there's a program where you can just sort of tell the government that I'm going to start my own small business. I'm going to become an individual entrepreneur. All right? And then the government says, okay, you can make as much money as you like as being an individual entrepreneur. Just tell us sort of what area you're working in there, what's your sort of field of expertise. Pay us a couple $100 for the state pension fund, Social Security, and then pay us, I don't know, 6% tax. Don't pay anything else at all because, you know, it's a federal system. There's no state and local taxes. It all goes to one place, 6%. Well, that's the reality of Russia, my friends. That is the reality of Russia. It is sort of a weird system here. I would say that the Russian system, weird in the sense that it really tends to benefit extremely large entities, like big corporations, and extremely small entities, as in one guy working for himself. Because the thing is that much like in a lot of countries, when you have white salary employees, as they're called here, you know, people who have a work by contract, they work officially, they get their salary from an employer. You have to deal with a lot of the problems in Russia that you do in other countries where, you know, some of the money has to go into the pension, Social Security, into some, you know, medical care and all this other stuff. There's a lot of things added onto it. So if you hire someone to work for $1,000, the employer winds up paying, you know, $1,300, $1,400 in Russia, which is definitely no good because that adds up really quickly and reduces the number of workers you can have or the ability for those workers to make a lot more money. But going from there, but that can be an advantage for big companies because they can deal with all that. And it also kind of helps that there's a lot of taxation bureaucracy for big companies because that squashes the little guy. That keeps those medium-sized and little companies right in their place. But on the other side of things, when you can do stuff like just register as being self-employed, whatever the heck that means, and pay like something like, I think it's a 4% tax. I mean, yeah, there's a brutal VAT tax in Russia. It's 20%. That's absolutely ridiculous. But I know people who live really well paying that I'm self-employed minimum tax. That is unbelievable. You know, Russia in the 90s set up the sort of idea of having this like 13% flat tax. And overall, it seems to keep everyone pretty happy. I don't know why the individual entrepreneurships pay even less than that, but God bless them for it. I can even show you one thing, too, that you may, maybe I shouldn't be showing this to you, but I'm going to anyways, because it really also proves my point. This is a screenshot of my sort of personal profile there on the Russian Taxation Ministry's website. And it shows the amount of property tax I had to pay for the house that I bought. And although that may look big to American eyes, that's under $10. Yeah, I really honestly don't think that there should be any property taxes anywhere because the logic then is that, well, if you can't pay your property taxes, we'll just take your property. That's a terrible form of logic. But if we're going to have property taxes, let's have a house and land be $10. That's freaking awesome. Can you imagine what would happen in America if people woke up the next day not having to pay these stupid local taxes for the dumb schools and state taxes on every little this, that, and the other, and started paying like 6% tax on for entrepreneurs, plus a couple $100 for Social Security, and then paying property taxes of $10. It would change the country overnight. And it's really unfortunate that America is still trapped in viewing Russia as this sort of Soviet hellhole that it isn't. I even remember that, speaking of people in America who know about, and money, there's a very famous radio talk show host named Dave Ramsey who consults people about their finances. And he recently even talked about how Russia is still communist. Guys, it's not. And in fact, the system of taxation here is something that I think a lot of American libertarians would drool over. Of course, taxation is theft, la la la, but 6% is a lot less theft, isn't it? So, yeah, it's a really, really good system if you want to work for yourself or work in a very small company. When you start getting into the realm of employees and not so much like contract workers, that's when things get rough. But if you're that stereotypical American small business, just a family trying to, put something together, like my grandfather owned a gas station, he had a couple guys who fixed cars. In Russia, he'd be paying very little. And he could have those guys come to work as contract workers. Basically, each thing they do, each car they fix could be sort of a separate contract, and they'd work on the, I guess that'd be commission, would be maybe the proper term. And, yeah. He'd be paying probably something like 6, 7, 8%. And that's it. Wouldn't that be nice? That would change America. And the problem is, guys, this great Russian taxation system, which seems really fair and pretty darn good to the common man who's willing to work for himself. In Russia, really no one knows about it. Don't get it. Don't understand it. Don't appreciate it. One of the dumbest things I've ever heard is when I was working for a video game company, we had one woman who was an accountant. And she one time told me, look at this book. This book is 133 pages. I think she said 133. I'm not really sure. Like this much book? I don't know. But anyway, she went on. In America, the entire tax code fits on one sheet of paper and cannot be changed only once per generation. If you're an American, you know that's nuts. But people here really believe that. They really believe that taxation and the process of filing for all this is only hard here. And by the way, it's not that hard here, especially when the government has their own special website to help you out doing it. They don't know what they've got. Well, we might not know what we've got until it's gone. Because when people know absolutely nothing about how their taxation system works, that means it's open to be changed by bureaucrats. So I'm very, very scared for myself and my friends because I'm enjoying not paying a whole lot of Russian taxes. And I know some of you might be as well. But anyways, I know someone who is not happy to ever pay taxes on anything. And so, Stefan Molyneux is joining us to talk about taxation from his passionate libertarian standpoint. One word of warning. This interview with Stefan Molyneux is actually from my archive. It was for a project that was funded and approved that became unfunded and unapproved. So hopefully Stefan won't mind that we're using this video for a purpose that he didn't exactly agree with, but I think using it for some project would be better than using it for no project at all. Well, we all know the cliche about there only being two certainties in life, death and taxes. But, don't we need taxation? People like to have roads. Doesn't America need an army to defend itself? Right?
The American government, as is governments throughout the West and governments throughout the world, have gone just a little bit beyond roads and armies. Now there's massive redistributionist schemes, there's control over higher education, there's a whole military-industrial complex, there is huge national debt, $150 trillion plus of unfunded liabilities just in America, bond offerings, strangleholds over various industries. A third of Americans need a permit just to have a job. So when we start talking about the bare bones of a government, what is traditionally considered the minarchist argument, which is we need a government for roads, the military, law courts, maybe some prisons and so on. Even if we accept that as a possible argument, there's still a lot to talk about in terms of how much government has grown beyond that state. And the original, of course, idea behind modern Western governments was they were supposed to protect your persons and your property. They were supposed to keep your property safe from theft, and they were supposed to keep your personhood safe from harm, and of course, keep the integrity of your borders and keep you going as a country. Now, they don't seem to be doing that much at all. They seem to be doing a whole lot of social engineering, a whole lot of vote buying with debt manipulation. They control currency, interest rates. Half of the healthcare system in America is controlled by the government, and 100% of the healthcare industry in most other Western countries. So we can have a conversation about taxation and the size of government. We've got a long way to reduce the size and scope of government before we start talking about roads and the military.
You, sir, make a very good point. We do have a long way to go. One of the things that's frustrating about Russia is that all Russians are absolutely sure that their government is completely incompetent. And yet every solution to a social problem in Russia, or economic or whatever, is some sort of government solution. And I'll never understand this. People always want the government to take action, but they completely believe that the government is incapable of taking action. I think we need to start thinking outside the box in this country. So, Stefan, is there some country that does taxation right? Is there some country that has a system that you approve of? Basically, is there some sort of low tax rate shining city on a hill out there somewhere on our planet? Hey, maybe it could be Russia.
It's kind of like health. Who is in perfect health? Well, I don't know, but there are certainly some people who are healthier and some people who are not as healthy. So there's two ways to approach taxation. One is it's a social contract. It's the price we pay to live in a civilized society. We need it to get the government to do things that otherwise wouldn't happen in a free market situation. That's kind of an argument from effect. Well, we don't like it. We hold our noses. We recognize that it involves compulsion and people get thrown in jail for not paying it, and it's subject to corruption and vote buying and all the bloated monstrosities of late democracy decadence. Or we can look at it, as I do, from a moral standpoint, which is we take all of the clutter, all of the noise, all of the verbiage, all of the propaganda out of the equation. And what is taxation? Well, taxation is one person or one group of people pointing a gun at someone else and saying, give me your money or you go to jail. And if you resist going to jail, I will shoot you, right? I say you're going to go to jail and I will escalate force against you until you comply or until you die. That's the bare bones mechanics of taxation. All of this other stuff is just a bunch of nonsense that is designed to confuse and obfuscate the basic reality of taxation, that it is the initiation of the use of force. Taxation is not done in self-defense. Taxation is the initiation of force. Now, people say, well, it's necessary and it's important and it's good and it's historical and we've always had it and how would we do things without it? But those exact same arguments were used for slavery, right? Slavery was an eternal human institution until it wasn't. People said, well, how on earth could crops get picked? How on earth could the cotton get picked? How on earth could anything be done agriculturally if we didn't have slavery? And, funny story, it turns out that when you got rid of slavery, you ended up with motivated workers. You ended up with people having to pay hourly wages. And what they could do then is they could weigh the cost of those hourly wages against investments in capital machinery, in combine harvesters, in fruit pickers, you name it. And then we ended up with a far more productive environment. So saying, well, how would cotton be picked without the slaves? The answer actually is it gets picked much, much better without slaves. And it's my view that since taxation is the initiation of the use of force, it's fundamentally immoral. And whether it benefits some people and whether we can't think of how roads would be provided in the absence of taxation, it's not really that important. We don't make decisions based upon consequences because nobody can guess those consequences, and those consequences are multifaceted. We make decisions based upon moral absolutes, and the moral absolute is that the initiation of force is wrong, and therefore we should be looking to reduce the size and scope of government and taxation wherever possible, down to, well, as low as we can conceivably get it.
Well, if we're talking about moral absolutes, as you say, where's the line when taxation goes from being some sort of big downer to being true tyranny?
Well, the line is the moral line. Because let's say that you spend 3 generations and untold amounts of struggle and strife to wrestle taxation down to 10%. Well, taxation, when it was introduced into America and into Canada, was a couple of percentage points on the super rich, right? And how long did it take to break out of that and become the, all Pac-Man civilization swallowing gargantuan monster that it has become? So even if you wrestle it all the way down, there's no freeze time spell where you can say, well, we got it down to 10%, so we're just going to keep it that way forever. That's not the way that governments work. When governments have money, they tend to use it to promote their own political interests. They use it to reward their friends and punish their enemies, as all political power has always been used throughout history and will continue to be used into the future. So if you could sort of magically get it down to 10% or 5%, and then you could get it to magically stay there, well, okay. But if you look at it from a medical analogy standpoint, if you know for sure the cancer's going to regrow, you don't want to leave 5% in there or 10% in there because you know it's going to regrow. Why don't you just take the whole damn cancer out, and then you won't have to worry about it in the future?
So here in Russia, we have a 13% flat tax rate for employees, be they some sort of hotshot CEO or some guy who's mopping up the floor. Everyone's getting 13%. But in contrast to that, if we look back to the height of America, sort of the golden glory of the 1950s nuclear family and all that stuff, taxes on the wealthy were pretty high during that period. So the question is, maybe don't we have to tax the rich? Or do the Russians have it right?
Well, we're all people, rich, poor, middle class, everyone's a person. We wouldn't say, well, if you're rich, you should get 5 times the votes, and if you're poor, you should get no vote, right? So the human rights should be the same. And this kind of slice and dice, fruit ninja, divide and conquer strategy of the left is unfortunately very effective. And what they do is they place a burden on people, and then they say, well, those rich people should pay more because somehow they came across their wealth unjustly, or it's mean, or they stole from you. It's this idea that there's only one size of pie in the world, and if somebody else has 2 slices, by golly, that means they've taken a slice from someone else. And of course, the reality is that people make pies. They create, wealth is created, it is not transferred in a free market. So what they do, of course, is they say, those rich people, they're not paying their fair share. They can afford more, and so they should pay more. And what happens? Well, people stop trying to become as rich. And the money, if they do become rich and they can't avoid the taxation, then what happens is the government takes millions and hundreds of millions and billions of dollars from the rich. And what does it do? Well, it doesn't use it usually to create jobs. It doesn't use it to invest in R&D. It just uses it to buy votes, to say, hey, here's a bunch of free stuff, everyone. Here's a bunch of free stuff for my government workers. Here's a bunch of free stuff for people dependent on the government, which is close to 50% of the U.S. population these days, and I'm sure it's higher in other European countries such as France and Germany, especially with the new migrant population.
Not so much so in Russia. If you come here, you've got to work. And I can definitely see the irony that this former communist paradise no longer has a nanny state. But one thing that does do is it really affects the quality and quantity of migrant labor. I'll tell you that much.
So what they do is they say, well, these people have your money unjustly. We're going to take it back for you. We're going to spend it on you. It's going to be great. But what happens is wages stagnate, right? As you take more and more money from the rich stop investing, they stop growing businesses. Then what's the point? They already have the money. They might as well enjoy it rather than work 80 hours a week to build a business. So wages stagnate. And then you end up with the government giving a pittance to the poor, like only about 20% of the money that goes into the welfare state actually ends out in the hands of the poor. So, politicians just take money from the rich by gunning you up against how nasty and evil and exploitive the rich are, and then the government just laughs all the way to the bank. You get a pittance, the rich lose their incentive, and you don't get any raises.
Okay, now one argument as to why the wealthy should pay more is the belief that large corporations like Lockheed Martin, Walmart, and Amazon pay 0% taxes with their sneaky accounting tricks. So is this a myth, or is there some truth to this? Help me out here.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how much all these companies pay, but let's say it's true. Let's say it's 100% true that these corporations pay no taxes. Here's the funny thing. The corporations don't actually exist, right? There's people, there's buildings, there's money, there's equipment, there's computers, there's lighting, there's air conditioning units. But companies, corporations, they're just these legal fictions that are made up primarily to protect the moneyed classes from lawsuits and bankruptcy proceedings. So corporations don't exist. Let's say you have a corporation of 10,000 people. Every single one of those 10,000 people is paying a massive amount of taxes, right? They're paying income taxes, sales taxes, property taxes. Like utility taxes, cigarette taxes, liquor taxes. They're paying a huge amount of taxes. So every single person in that corporation, from the CEO all the way down to the janitor, are paying massive amounts of taxes on their income. So what does it mean? When 10,000 people in an entire organization are paying 30, 40, 50% taxation, what does it mean to say the corporation is not paying taxes? What the government does is it invents this ghost called the corporation and then say, that ghost is getting away with murder. You got to tax that ghost, because if you tax that ghost, somehow it's fair. And it's crazy, because let's say corporations go from paying 0% taxes, if that's what's actually happening, and they, wow, we're going to pay the 40% taxes that was in before the Trump tax cut. Okay, so the corporation now has to pay 40% of its profits in taxes. Well, what happens? Well, it means that it can invest less, it can grow less, it can provide fewer wages and bonuses, and the workers' wages stagnate, because this legal fiction has been invented that everyone now thinks must pay taxes. Like the evil corporation narrative is central to leftist indoctrination. But it's the people who will end up paying the price, because there is no corporation that can pay taxes. There are only people working within the corporation who can pay taxes, and if you jack up taxes on some corporation, all that means is there's less money for the people in the company, and they lose out.
Okay, Mr. Molyneux, I don't want to sound like a troll here, but I just want to be clear. You say that libertarianism is morally superior, so, the big question is, then is it feasible and inevitable that it comes to pass in America, that there's going to be a libertarian revolution? But then again, if you think about it, back during the communist days, everyone felt that Marxism was morally superior, and Marx was pretty darn sure that it was inevitable too. The problem was the implementation of it was definitely a little bit troublesome, especially here in Russia.
Well, as somebody who's trying to move the needle of sophisticated and intelligent thinking on this topic, my friend, I don't like to talk about inevitabilities. It's sort of like a guy looking down at his giant gut and saying, is it inevitable that I'm going to be fat for the rest of my life? It's like, well, you could get on a treadmill, you could change your diet, you could exercise more, and lo and behold, you'll start to shrink that gut. So I don't like to believe in inevitabilities, because when you believe in inevitabilities, you kind of take free will out of the equation. And what that means is you become a spectator rather than a doer. You become a watcher rather than an actor. In other words, if you're watching a horse race and you've got a lot of money invested in a particular horse, you yell and you scream, but you don't imagine that actually changes the outcome that much of the horse race. You don't get in there and push the horse because, hey, you're just watching. You can't go in and do anything. So when people say, is it inevitable? Is it this? Is that? Like, no, it's not inevitable, because you can make good arguments. You can reason with people. I have 600 million views and downloads, over 4,000 shows I've done over 12 years. And yeah, it's moved the needle of millions and millions of people's thinking. And so because of that, we are one step closer, or 10 steps closer, or a million steps closer to a freer society. So I don't think anything's inevitable. It's one of these self-fulfilling prophecies. If you think something's inevitable, you won't take any steps to avoid it, and that kind of makes it inevitable. Whereas if you remember you have choice, you can affect the outcome.
Okay, again, I'm not trying to be a smart aleck here, but a fat man can change. He can do his best to exercise and eat less and slim down. But no matter what he does, he's not going to transform into a Pegasus and fly into the sky on magical wings. So how can we feasibly implement the policies that you recommend?
Well, was it feasible for there to be equal rights for women? Was it feasible to end slavery? Was it feasible to end serfdom? Well, these things all occurred. And why did they occur? Because fundamentally philosophers extended the definition of what a human being was and said we are all under one moral law. And therefore it is immoral to own slaves. It violates self-ownership. It's the initiation of the use of force, because a slave is tortured or brutalized if he wants to escape. And so we extended what it meant to be human being, and we took everyone, increased the tent of everyone being under the same moral law. And that meant you couldn't be a serf who was tied to the land. It could be bought and sold with the land like a piece of furniture. It meant that in a lot of places you couldn't be or couldn't have the aristocracy anymore, and you couldn't have kings appointed by God, because that's a violation of equality under the law. And we drew women into women can now take on debts and engage in contracts and all things that formerly were forbidden in some places. So the extension of what it means to be human and the inclusion of everybody under the same moral law is the continual progress and process of advancement of civilization and humanity. So we have achieved a lot. If you just go back a couple of hundred years or a couple of thousand years, we have achieved an enormous amount of liberty. And to say, well, we got to stop here, man, because the next one's a real doozy. Well, if people had said that in the past, we wouldn't have the capacity to have this kind of conversation.
Okay, guys, so that was our big discussion on taxation. I hope you found it interesting. At least I sure did. Well, then again, I'm sitting here. But if you did find it interesting, please share these videos. You know, big tech is against us here. It's fighting us every step of the way. If you guys don't share these videos, this program is not going to be viewed by anyone. So I'm really relying on you to click that share button and spread these around. But normally after every episode of Tim Kirby Russia is uploaded, we then go in and upload a full unedited interview version. But the interview with Stefan was very short. There wasn't much more that you didn't see. So we're not going to do that this time. So next week we're going to be back with another episode, full episode of Tim Kirby Russia. Thank you very much for watching and take care. До свидания.